So there's small evolutionary changes happen. So we are saying what we've been studying so far, that life arises from a single cell bacteria. So there was a single cell bacteria long time ago. That's the fossil we found. And then over time, it turned into, multicellular organisms, and we've got mammals and humans today, other primates as well. So in this chapter, we're going to kind of talk about how it all started and how we are here where we are today. So how this diversity came from. So that's what we're going to talk about. So if you look at this picture here, we have a tree, we have a bacteria, and then we have a bird here. So what is a species? How tree and bacteria are not the same species? Why are they, considered different species? Why bird is not same as the tree? Or why this tree is not same as this bacteria or the bird? So why, they're considered different species? We're going to talk about that. What makes them a different species? So that's what we're going to discuss in this chapter. So how do small mutations, even if numerous, produce new species? So before we go into that, we need to define what is a species. Anybody remembers from chapter 1 or I think 3, biological species concept? Anybody remembers that? How we defined species? If you don't remember, you need to write it down in bold in your notes. We're going to talk about it today. And that's one way. That's one way to define the species. That's how we define species. Anyway, so before we talk about that, there's this person I need you guys to know. There, some people, some very important people we talked about this class, and this is one of them, Carolus Linnaeus. He studied Latin, and this is his name in Latin. I don't know how else you would say it, but that's his name spelled in Latin. So he defined species by appearance. So here in this picture, if you're looking at 3 species, some of them, have very similar looking leaves. So if we're looking at appearance, the leaves might be the same, but they might be different species. But anyway, so he defined species by appearance. That's one way to define them. And he also created a naming system. When I say naming system, we talked about genus and species. We had domain, family, genus, species. So that's what he came up with, that system to name the species. Now, so if you guys remember, I said that genus was like your last name, your family name. Maybe your family name is Smith, that's the name of the genus. And then the species would be your first name. So your mom can be Mary Smith, you can be John Smith, your brother can be, I don't know, Bob Smith. So species is the first name, you can think of that. And then the genus is the last name. So anyway, so he came up with this system, and the reason he did, because the scientists, all of the scientists all over the world, they didn't know English, not all of them at least. So if a scientist published a paper about an oak tree in French, and then another one published it in English, they wouldn't know that they're talking about the same thing. So he came up with this system. Each time any scientist published a paper, they have to use the same Latin name. So he put all the names in Latin for the species, different species. So each time a scientist had to, publish a paper, they would be using the same name. That way, everybody kind of knows there's this much research on this type of species. So he came up with that system, and his name is Carolus Linnaeus. So that's an important name. You might see it on the exam as well. So make sure you write it down in your notes. So each species name combines the broader classification with genus with the term species. For humans, the scientific name for us is Homo sapiens. How many people know that? Did you guys know that?
Yeah.
And then we also talked about kings play chess on fine green squares. So that's what the system is. So that's what we're talking about right now. So we have the domain, and then we have kingdom for kings, phylum for play. So we use that mnemonic to kind of go over this system. And then the very important one is species. So that's sapiens. This is the genus Homo. Okay, now we have the biological species concept. You guys need to write this in bold. This is very, very important. And this is not the only way we define species. I just said that they're also defined as, morphological, the way they look. Biological species concept defines species based on their potential, so they can interbreed and produce a fertile offspring. This is the person, Ernest Mayr. He was a zoologist, and he looked at animal species, and he came up with the biological species concept. So if we say this species is able to breed with this species and they're able to produce a offspring that's also able to reproduce a fertile offspring, then they are the same species. But if they can't do that, then they're not considered the same species. You guys remember horse, mule, and donkey example? So if not, let me show you one more time. Yes, you do. So if a horse and donkey mate, they can produce a mule, and mule is not able to reproduce. Therefore, they're different species. Now, this doesn't happen naturally. This happens in captivity, human captivity. And usually we do this, because the mules, they are good animals to, kind of do the labor. So this happens in captivity. This does not happen in nature. There's also, I don't know if you guys heard about liger. So yes. Yeah, you did. So liger is another organism or species, you can say, that's produced from lion and tiger. I don't know if they are stronger than both of them, but they're not able to reproduce. Therefore, it doesn't happen in nature. It happens in captivity, human captivity. It doesn't happen naturally. But anyway, so going back to biological species concept, it defines species based on their potential to interbreed. Now, I also said that's not the only way. There's morphological species concept, right? Morpho means shape. We look at the features that they have, and we cannot apply this biological species concept to dinosaurs. And the reason, because we can't go back in time and see who can reproduce with who, and if the offspring will be fertile. So in that case, we can just look at their fossils or what we find, and then we have to kind of separate them based on the way they look. So that's morphological species concept. So this is not the only way to define them. And when we cannot kind of test this, then we have to depend on another concept to see if they're the same species or they're the different species. Okay, you guys have a question there. The biological species concept cannot be applied to C. So you guys all got that. It's extinct organisms, because we can't really, we don't have them here. We can't see if they can reproduce. If they can their offspring reproduce again? Another thing, the definition a little bit differs for the organisms like bacteria, because they don't really have the same behavior for reproduction as animals or humans or other maybe plant species. So that differs a little bit too. So we can't really apply the biological species concept there. Also, if there's asexual reproduction, that might be difficult. So there's a lot of arguments going on in the scientific community regarding all that. So that's why we have like multiple concepts for that. And this person, most people agree with them. So most of the population, kind of agrees with them. And then this is what we use in most of our biology books. So speciation, I said, it's a formation of new species. And it happens when some individual species can no longer interbreed with the rest of the group. So one thing this happens through is adaptation. If there's an adaptation, for example, if you just look in the beak size and the climate is changing, the food availability is changing, and this bird is able to adapt, and different species arise from that. So adaptation is a big change that can in the species, and if there's adaptation, they might not be able to reproduce with each other, maybe because there was a mutation or something. So that's formation of new species, and that's one way that it can arise.